When Elena Hartwell and her infant son are sold at auction to pay her dead husband's debts, mysterious rancher Caleb Morrison steps in to save them. But as Elena builds a new life at his remote Montana ranch, she carries a devastating secret about her husband's death that could destroy everything. Meanwhile, Caleb battles his own demons from the war, convinced he doesn't deserve happiness. When their paths collide and shocking truths are revealed, both must decide if love can overcome the darkest secrets. Will Elena's lies tear them apart, or will Caleb's unconditional acceptance prove that some bonds are stronger than guilt and shame? A heartwarming story of redemption, second chances, and the healing power of truth. Like and subscribe for more emotional stories that will touch your heart. I know what really happened to your husband. Widow's dark secret exposed at remote ranch. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Silver Creek as townsfolk gathered for what would become the most shameful spectacle Montana Territory had witnessed in years. Elena Hartwell stood trembling on the makeshift wooden platform, clutching her 6-month-old son Samuel against her chest. Her dark hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, framing a face that bore the haunted beauty of recent grief and desperate fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out Silas Turner, the banker, whose cold smile revealed his pleasure in this moment, "before you stands the widow of Thomas Hartwell and her child. Strong woman, good for household work, cooking, and whatever other needs a man might have." Elena's stomach churned at his suggestive tone. The crowd below was a mix of ranchers, miners, and townspeople. Some looked away in shame. Others calculated what use they might make of a young widow and her baby. "Bidding starts at $50 for the pair," Turner announced. In the crowd, weathered faces showed varying degrees of interest and disgust. Elena searched desperately for a kind face, someone who might show mercy. Instead, she saw only the cold calculation of men viewing livestock. 3 days' hard riding had brought Caleb Morrison to Silver Creek. His buckskin stallion was exhausted foam still clinging to its muzzle from their urgent journey. Word of the auction had reached him through a traveling merchant who spoke of it with disgust. Something deep in Caleb's chest had twisted at the news. Thomas Hartwell. He remembered that name. As the bidding reached $75, Caleb pushed through the crowd. A burly miner with tobacco-stained teeth was eyeing Elena in a way that made her clutch Samuel tighter. "85, the miner called out, his gaze lingering on Elena's figure. Caleb's jaw clenched. He guided his horse forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 32, he was tall and lean, with dark brown hair touched by silver at the temples. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a memento from Gettysburg that he carried like a badge of shame rather than honor. 100, Caleb said, his voice carrying quiet authority. The crowd turned. Turner's eyebrows rose. "Sir, I don't believe we've been introduced." "Name's Caleb Morrison. I have the money right here." He dismounted with fluid grace, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. Gold coins clinked as he emptied them onto Turner's table. "Well, actually, the debt is 120, Turner said, licking his lips nervously. Without hesitation, Caleb added more coins. "That settles it." For the first time since stepping onto that platform, Elena allowed herself to look directly at her savior. What she saw in his blue eyes was not the hunger or calculation she'd grown to expect, but something else entirely. Pain, perhaps, recognition, and beneath it all, a gentleness that made her heart skip. "Going once," Turner called reluctantly. "Going twice, sold to Mr. Morrison." The crowd began to disperse, many shaking their heads at what they'd witnessed. Caleb climbed the steps to the platform, each footfall deliberate and sure. "Ma'am," he said softly, removing his hat, "if you'll come with me." Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this?" Caleb glanced around at the lingering spectators. "Not here, I have a wagon waiting. We can talk properly once we're away from prying eyes." She studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. "How do I know your intentions are any better than theirs?" A ghost of a smile touched his weathered features. "You don't, but I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you or your boy." He paused, then added quietly, "I knew your husband, Mrs. Hartwell." Elena's eyes widened. This changed everything. Thomas had been a soldier before their marriage, though he'd spoken little of those days. The nightmares that sometimes woke him suggested experiences too dark for words. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. With as much dignity as she could muster, Elena allowed Caleb to help her down from the platform. Samuel, who had been unusually quiet throughout the ordeal, began to fuss as if sensing the change in his circumstances. The wagon Caleb led them to was sturdy and well-maintained, with supplies already loaded in the back. He'd clearly planned for passengers. As they settled onto the bench seat, Elena noticed his hands on the reins. They were strong, calloused from honest work, but gentle as he guided the horses away from town. "Tell me about Thomas," Elena said once Silver Creek had disappeared behind them. Caleb was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "We served together in the Pennsylvania 7th Cavalry. Good soldier. Brave man." He glanced at her. "At Gettysburg, he pulled me out of the line of fire when Confederate sharpshooters had me pinned down. Took a bullet in the shoulder doing it." Elena nodded, recognizing the story. Thomas had shown her the scar, though he'd minimized his own heroism in the telling. "After the war, we lost touch," Caleb continued. "I heard he'd settled out this way, gotten married." His eyes softened as they fell on Samuel. "Had a family. He died 3 months ago," Elena said quietly. "Fever took him quick. Left us with considerable debts." The lie came easily now. She told it so many times that it almost felt true. Better than the reality of finding Thomas's lifeless body in their barn, the chair kicked over beneath his feet and that damning letter clutched in his cold hand. Caleb nodded, accepting her explanation without question. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man." If only you knew, Elena thought, her heart clenching with familiar guilt. If only any of them knew. "So what happens now, Mr. Morrison?" she asked. "Have I simply traded one master for another?" "No, ma'am. I have a ranch about a day's ride from here. Nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. You and Samuel can stay there until you decide what you want to do. I'll help you get on your feet." Elena studied him suspiciously. "And what do you expect in return?" "Nothing." When she looked skeptical, he added, "I owed Thomas a debt. Consider this payment." "What kind of debt?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop herself. Caleb's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. "The kind that doesn't die with amen." They rode in contemplative silence as the afternoon heat gave way to the cooler air of early evening. The landscape gradually changed from dusty plains to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Samuel had fallen asleep against Elena's chest, lulled by the wagon's gentle motion. "It's beautiful," Elena observed, as mountains appeared on the horizon. "Home," Caleb said simply. As if responding to his words, a hidden valley opened before them. Nestled among towering pines sat a modest log cabin with a stone chimney. A barn and corral stood nearby where several horses grazed peacefully. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with willows that swayed in the evening breeze. Elena's breath caught. After months of uncertainty and fear, the sight of this peaceful sanctuary filled her with something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, Samuel sleeping between them, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging in the evening air. "Welcome to Morrison Ranch," Caleb said softly. The cabin's interior was simple but well-crafted. A main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs and shelves lined with books. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom. "You and Samuel can have the bedroom," Caleb said, setting down Elena's meager possessions. "I'll take the loft." Elena started to protest, but something in his expression told her it would be useless. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll start supper while you get settled. Nothing fancy, but it'll be hot." Left alone with Samuel, Elena took her first real breath in months. The bedroom was sparse but comfortable, with a bed covered in a handmade quilt and a window overlooking the creek. She settled Samuel on the bed, surrounding him with pillows, then allowed herself a moment to simply stand still. For the first time since that terrible morning when she'd found Thomas, Elena felt safe. When she returned to the main room, delicious aromas were coming from the stove. Caleb had removed his coat and hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. With his sleeves rolled up, he looked more at ease than she'd seen him yet. "Smells wonderful," she said. He glanced up, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. "When you live alone, you either learn to cook or eat poorly." They shared a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread. Elena found herself hungrier than she'd realized, accepting a second helping when Caleb offered. "How long have you been here?" she asked. 6 years. Bought the place after I needed somewhere quiet to heal." Elena sensed there was more to that story, but she didn't press. Everyone had wounds from the war. Some were just more visible than others. As they ate, she found herself telling Caleb about her life before Thomas's death. Growing up in Denver, her father's small dry goods store, her dreams of teaching school before meeting the charming soldier who would become her husband. Thomas had such plans, she said, her voice soft with memory. He was going to strike it rich, mining, then start a freight business. We were going to have a fine house in town and a house full of children. Dreams fade quickly out here, don't they? Caleb's expression was understanding tinged with his own regrets. A cry from the bedroom interrupted their conversation. Elena excused herself to tend to Samuel. When she returned with the now alert baby, Caleb had cleared the table and was stoking the fire against the evening chill. "There's fresh milk cooling by the window," he told her. "From my cows. You're welcome to whatever you need." Elena settled in the rocking chair by the fire, grateful for his thoughtfulness. This was more kindness than she'd experienced in months. "You know," she said as Samuel nursed contentedly, "when they put us up on that platform, I thought we were lost. Completely and utterly lost." Caleb's expression darkened. No one should have to endure that, especially not Thomas's wife and child. The way he said it with such conviction made Elena look at him more closely. There was anger there, barely controlled, and something else. Guilt, perhaps. The debt was real, she admitted quietly. "I'm not disputing that, but the way they went about collecting it..." She shook her head. "Turner's been ruining families for years with his schemes." Caleb said, a hard edge to his voice. Someone should have stopped him long ago. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the ranch. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and Samuel's soft murmurs as he explored his new surroundings from the safety of his mother's lap. Eventually, Samuel began to fuss, ready for sleep. Elena excused herself to put him down for the night. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Caleb on the porch smoking a cigarette and gazing at the stars. "He's asleep," she said softly, joining him. "Once he's down, he usually sleeps through the night." Caleb nodded, offering her the rocking chair, while he leaned against the porch railing. The night was cool but pleasant, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. "It's so peaceful here," Elena observed. "I can see why you chose it." Caleb tapped ash from his cigarette. "After the war, I couldn't stand crowds. Too much noise, too many demands. Out here, a man can breathe." "And a woman," Elena asked gently, "can she breathe here too?" Caleb looked at her, his expression thoughtful in the dim light spilling from the cabin windows. "I reckon that depends on the woman." Elena smiled. "I suppose it does." She rocked gently, considering her situation. "I won't be a burden to you, Caleb. I can cook clean, tend a garden. I'm stronger than I look, and once Samuel is older, I'll find a way to make my own living." "There's no rush," Caleb said. "You're welcome here as long as you need." Elena studied him in the starlight. Was it really such a significant debt that you'd feel obligated to do all this? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his cigarette glowing in the darkness. "Thomas did more than just save my life," he finally said. "After I was wounded when they thought I might not make it, he wrote to my family. Told them I was alive when they'd been informed I was missing, presumed dead. Gave them hope when they had none." The depth of his loyalty touched Elena. She was beginning to understand that beneath Caleb Morrison's reserved exterior was a man of profound honor. Still, she insisted, "I want to contribute. It's important to me." Caleb nodded, respecting her determination. "We'll figure it out." He crushed out his cigarette. "It's getting late, and you've had a long journey. You should rest." Elena rose suddenly, aware of her exhaustion. "Good night, Caleb, and thank you for everything." "Good night, Elena." As she made her way back to the bedroom, Elena was struck by how quickly this place had begun to feel safe. Caleb Morrison was still largely unknown to her, yet she trusted him in a way she couldn't fully explain. Perhaps it was simply that, after months of facing hostility and judgment in Silver Creek, his quiet kindness felt like salvation. As she lay beside Samuel in the comfortable bed, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch at night, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope for the future. But even as she drifted towards sleep, the weight of her secret pressed against her chest like a stone. Thomas hadn't died of fever. He died by his own hand, driven to despair by debts and guilt and the bottle of laudanum he'd been using to quiet his nightmares. She'd found the letter, read his final desperate words asking for forgiveness, burned it that same morning before anyone could discover the truth. Some secrets, Elena told herself, were meant to stay buried, even if they threatened to bury her along with them. The days at Morrison Ranch settled into a gentle rhythm that Elena hadn't known since before Thomas's drinking had gotten out of control. She rose early to prepare breakfast, the kitchen gradually becoming familiar territory under her hands. Caleb spent his mornings tending cattle and training horses, but always returned for the midday meal, asking about Samuel's progress and sharing quiet observations about ranch life. Samuel thrived in the clean mountain air. At 7 months, he was attempting to pull himself up on furniture, his determined grunts and babbles filling the cabin with life. Caleb had fashioned a wooden playpen where Samuel could safely explore while Elena worked. What struck Elena most was how naturally Caleb interacted with her son. Each evening, he would hold Samuel while she prepared dinner, speaking to him in low, gentle tones about the day's activities. Samuel had taken to reaching for Caleb whenever he entered the room, a development that seemed to both please and perplex the rancher. "You're a natural with him," Elena commented one evening as she watched Caleb carefully support Samuel's attempts to stand. Caleb looked surprised by the observation. "Never spent much time around children before." "Well, you'd never know it." A hint of color touched his weathered cheeks. "He's a fine boy. Smart, too. Look how he figures things out." Elena smiled, but beneath her contentment lay a constant thread of anxiety. The longer they stayed, the more attached Samuel became to Caleb, and the more Elena found herself imagining a future that included the quiet rancher. It was a dangerous line of thinking. She was still Thomas's widow, still carrying secrets that could destroy any chance of happiness. The thought of those secrets grew heavier when 2 weeks after their arrival, Caleb announced that the annual Harvest Festival was approaching in Whitefish Creek, a larger town about 15 miles north. "Thought you might enjoy getting out," he said over breakfast. "Meet some of the neighbors. There'll be music, dancing, good food." Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't been in a social situation since before Thomas's death, and never in a community where she was a stranger. But the thought of conversation with other women of normal social interaction was appealing. "I'd like that," she said, "but I don't have anything suitable to wear." Caleb considered this practical concern. "Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile in Whitefish Creek might have something. We could head into town tomorrow, see what's available." The ride to Whitefish Creek revealed a landscape transformed by autumn. Aspens had turned golden, their leaves shimmering in the crisp air like coins scattered by giants. Samuel was fascinated by the changing colors, pointing and babbling at everything he saw. Whitefish Creek was more prosperous than Silver Creek, with well-maintained buildings and an air of genuine community rather than desperate frontier survival. The Mercantile was well-stocked, and Mrs. Patterson, a cheerful woman in her 50s, greeted Caleb warmly. "Caleb Morrison, haven't seen you in months." Her curious gaze fell on Elena and Samuel. "And who might these folks be?" "This is Mrs. Elena Hartwell and her son, Samuel." Caleb introduced them. "They're staying at my place for a while." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained warm. "Welcome to Whitefish Creek, dear. Any friend of Caleb's is welcome here." They explained their need for a dress suitable for the festival, and Mrs. Patterson's face lit up. "Oh, I have just the thing. Came in on the last shipment from back east." The dress she produced was lovely deep blue calico with delicate white trim around the collar and cuffs. Simple but far more elegant than Elena's worn clothing. "Try it on," Mrs. Patterson encouraged, directing Elena to a curtained alcove. "I'll mind the little one." The dress fit perfectly, the color bringing out the green in Elena's eyes and flattering her still slender figure. When she emerged from behind the curtain, both Mrs. Patterson and Caleb stared. "Oh my," Mrs. Patterson breathed. "That's just perfect." Caleb said nothing for a moment, but the admiration in his eyes made Elena's heart skip. "We'll take it," he said, finally reaching for his wallet. "Caleb, it's too much," Elena protested, knowing such garments were expensive. "Consider it a gift," he said firmly. "You've more than earned it with all you do at the ranch." As Mrs. Patterson wrapped the dress, she engaged in what Caleb had warned Elena was her favorite pastime, gathering information about her neighbors. "So, Mrs. Hartwell, are you from around these parts originally?" Elena explained her background briefly, sharing only that she was a widow whose husband had died of fever. She made no mention of the auction, and Caleb remained diplomatically silent. Well, you're certainly welcome here, Mrs. Patterson said warmly. We're friendly folk, not like some of those rougher mining towns. And Caleb here is one of our most respected residents. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the praise. Just trying to be neighborly, ma'am. Too neighborly for your own good sometimes, Mrs. Patterson chided gently. Man needs more than work and horses for company. Her meaningful glance between Caleb and Elena made her implication clear. On the ride back to the ranch, Elena found herself wondering about Caleb's past relationships. Had there been others before her who might have shared his life? The thought provoked an unexpected twinge of jealousy that she quickly suppressed. Mrs. Patterson seems nice, she commented. Caleb nodded. Salt of the earth, her late husband helped me when I first came to these parts. Jim taught me about ranching in Montana different from back east, and she made sure I didn't starve that first winter. Elena was touched by this glimpse into Caleb's early days in the territory. You've built a good life here. Trying to, he agreed. Some days are better than others. Samuel, who had been dozing against Elena's chest, awoke with a cry of hunger. Caleb immediately guided the wagon to a shaded spot beneath a large cottonwood. We can stop here, he offered. Give you privacy to tend to him. Elena was continually moved by his consideration. Thomas, for all his charm, had never shown such awareness of her needs or Samuel's. As she nursed her son in the shade, Elena found herself comparing the two men more and more often. It wasn't fair Thomas had been young, caught up in dreams of striking it rich, battling demons from the war that he'd never been able to conquer. But Caleb's steady presence, his quiet strength, and unwavering support showed her what a true partnership could look like. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She was a widow of less than 6 months dependent on Caleb's charity. Any feelings beyond gratitude were inappropriate and potentially disastrous. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that filled her when he smiled, or the sense of rightness she felt moving about his cabin as if it were her own home. The Harvest Festival in Whitefish Creek was everything Caleb had promised. The town square was decorated with corn stalks and pumpkins lanterns strung between the buildings, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Tables laden with food lined one side of the square, and a platform had been erected for the musicians who were already playing lively tunes. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness as they approached the celebration. Samuel was wide-eyed in her arms, taking in all the new sights and sounds. Caleb Morrison, a tall man with an impressive mustache, strode toward them, hand extended. Thought you might not make it this year. Wouldn't miss it, Sheriff, Caleb replied, shaking the man's hand. Elena, this is Sheriff Tom Dawson. Tom misses Elena Hartwell and her son Samuel. The sheriff tipped his hat to Elena. Ma'am, pleasure to meet you. Fine-looking boy you have there. Thank you, Sheriff. Caleb bringing you around means you must be special, Sheriff Dawson continued with a wink. Man hardly socializes unless forced at gunpoint. Caleb looked embarrassed. Don't listen to him, Elena. Tom exaggerates. Do I now? The sheriff laughed. When was the last time you attended a social gathering, Caleb? Christmas of '80, Caleb replied without hesitation. My point exactly. Sheriff Dawson tipped his hat again. Mrs. Hartwell, hope you enjoy our little celebration. As the sheriff moved off, Caleb guided Elena toward the gathering. Sorry about that. Tom's a good man, but he lacks what my mother would call discretion. Elena smiled. I like him. He seems to care about you. Most folks around here look out for each other, Caleb explained. Nature of things in country this wild. They made their way through the crowd, Caleb introducing Elena to what seemed like half the county. Each greeting was friendly, though Elena noticed curious glances and a few raised eyebrows at her presence with the normally solitary rancher. Mrs. Patterson appeared claiming Samuel for a cuddle while insisting that Elena and Caleb join the dancing. Elena hesitated. She hadn't danced in years and never with anyone but Thomas. But Caleb surprised her by offering his hand. Might as well give them something real to talk about, he said with a rare grin. Despite their protestations of rustiness, they moved well together. Caleb was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, and Elena found herself laughing as they twirled and stepped in time to the fiddle music. When the dance ended, they were both slightly breathless, and Elena was acutely aware of the warmth of Caleb's hand at her waist. Not bad for a couple of hermits, she teased. Something shifted in Caleb's eyes, a warmth, an openness she hadn't seen before. Not bad at all. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a striking woman who addressed Caleb with obvious familiarity. Well, well, Caleb Morrison actually dancing. The world must be ending. Caleb turned his expression, closing slightly. Hello, Victoria. Didn't know you were back in town. Victoria Hayes was perhaps 25, beautiful in the way that spoke of privilege and careful breeding. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged beneath a fashionable hat, and her dress was clearly from an expensive Eastern dressmaker. She looked at Elena with undisguised curiosity. Got back last month, Victoria replied. Father's health isn't what it used to be. She extended a gloved hand to Elena. Victoria Hayes, my father is territorial governor. Elena Hartwell, Elena replied, taking the offered hand. Pleased to meet you. Victoria's gaze moved assessingly between them. How do you know our Caleb? There was a slight emphasis on our that made Elena's spine stiffen. Before Elena could respond, Caleb answered smoothly. Elena's husband was a war buddy of mine. She and Samuel are staying at the ranch while she gets back on her feet. How charitable of you, Victoria said, though her tone suggested she found it more puzzling than admirable. Always the gentleman, aren't it, you Caleb? There was history there, Elena realized. The way Victoria looked at Caleb, the casual possessiveness in her manner, suggested a romantic past. Just doing what anyone would, Caleb replied, his discomfort evident. Hardly anyone, Victoria corrected. She turned back to Elena with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Has he shown you the falls yet? Most beautiful spot in the county. Caleb used to take me there for picnics. The casual revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. So there had been something between them. Something significant enough that Victoria felt comfortable mentioning their intimate moments. We've been rather busy at the ranch, Elena managed, keeping her voice neutral. Well, you must insist he take you, Victoria said. It's not to be missed. She touched Caleb's arm familiarly. Save me a dance later, won't you? Caleb nodded, though without enthusiasm. If you like. As Victoria glided away, Elena felt the evening's magic dissipating. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. Old friend, Elena asked, aiming for casual and not entirely succeeding. Something like that. It was a long time ago. Elena wanted to ask more, but sensed his reluctance. Instead, she suggested they check on Samuel, who was now surrounded by a group of admiring women, with Mrs. Patterson proudly showing him off. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough, though Elena was more aware than ever of the curious glances and whispered conversations that followed them. Caleb danced with Victoria as promised, but spent most of his time with Elena, ensuring she felt welcomed and included. As the evening wound down, lanterns were lit around the square, and a bonfire was built at the center. People gathered around to roast corn and share stories. Samuel had fallen asleep against Elena's shoulder, worn out by the excitement and attention. Ready to head home? Caleb asked, noticing her stroking Samuel's back soothingly. Home. The word sent a pang through Elena. The ranch had begun to feel like home in a way Silver Creek never had, but it wasn't truly hers. She was a guest dependent on Caleb's charity, however kindly he treated her. If you don't mind, she replied. It's been wonderful, but Samuel's had quite enough excitement. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Samuel sleeping soundly in Elena's arms, and both adults lost in their own thoughts. The moon was rising, casting silver light over the landscape and turning the familiar trail into something magical. Did you enjoy yourself? Caleb asked finally. Very much, Elena assured him. Everyone was so welcoming. Caleb glanced at her. Even Victoria. Elena hesitated. She had no right to feel jealous or possessive, but the emotions were there nonetheless. She seems interested in you. A soft laugh escaped him. Not in the way you think. May I ask what happened between you? The question slipped out before Elena could stop it. I'm sorry, that's far too personal. It's all right, Caleb said. Nothing dramatic. Victoria and I courted briefly 2 years ago. Her father thought it would be a good match, the territorial governor's daughter and a successful rancher. But she wanted a husband who would move to the territorial capital, help with her father's political career. I'm not a politician, Elena. Never will be. Elena absorbed this information. She's very beautiful. Yes, Caleb agreed simply. Then after a pause, but not for me. The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. As they crested the final hill before the ranch, the cabin came into view, a single lantern burning in the window, where Caleb had left it lit for their return. It looked welcoming, peaceful, everything a home should be. "Thank you for today," Elena said softly. "For the dress, the dancing, all of it." Caleb's profile was strong in the moonlight as he guided the horses down the slope. "No need for thanks. I enjoyed it too, more than I expected to." When they reached the cabin, Caleb helped Elena down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close, Samuel sleeping between them, the night quiet except for the soft sounds of the horses and the distant call of an owl. "Elena," Caleb began, his voice low and uncertain. But whatever he might have said was interrupted by Samuel stirring and letting out a small cry. The moment broke and Elena stepped back, adjusting her hold on her son. "I should get him to bed," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Good night," Caleb replied, watching as she made her way into the cabin. As Elena settled Samuel in his cradle, she was acutely aware of the sound of Caleb caring for the horses outside. Her feelings for him were growing stronger each day, developing into something far more complex than gratitude. But she was still Thomas's widow, still carrying the weight of secrets that could destroy any chance of happiness. She couldn't afford to mistake kindness for courtship or to risk the sanctuary they had found by reaching for something more. Yet as she readied herself for bed, Lena couldn't help remembering the way Caleb had looked at her as they danced, or the warmth of his hands at her waist in the moonlight. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included not just security for herself and Samuel, but also love. Perhaps even the kind of deep, abiding partnership she glimpsed in the way Caleb cared for them both. But first, she would have to find the courage to tell him the truth about Thomas. And that was a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. November brought the first serious snowfall to the Montana highlands, transforming the ranch into a pristine winter wonderland. Elena watched from the cabin window as Caleb moved between the barn and the house, breaking ice on the water troughs and ensuring the livestock had adequate feed and shelter. Life had settled into an even deeper rhythm of intimacy and trust. Elena had taken over all the household duties, freeing Caleb to focus on the demanding work of preparing the ranch for winter. Samuel, now 8 months old, was pulling himself up on everything and attempting his first tentative steps. Caleb had carved him wooden toys that the baby dragged across the cabin floor with delighted concentration. What had changed most significantly was the relationship between Elena and Caleb themselves. The careful distance they'd maintained had gradually dissolved into something warmer, more natural. Caleb's hand would linger when he passed her a dish at dinner. Elena would find excuses to touch his shoulder as she passed his chair. They would sit closer together by the fire in the evenings, sometimes their knees brushing as they talked. Neither had spoken directly about their growing feelings, but the awareness hung between them, like smoke from the hearth, impossible to ignore, warming everything it touched. The weight of Elena's secret had grown heavier as her feelings deepened. The longer she waited to tell Caleb the truth about Thomas's death, the more devastating the revelation would be. Yet she couldn't find the words, couldn't bear the thought of seeing disgust or pity replace the warmth in his eyes. On a particularly cold morning when the snow was falling heavily enough to make outdoor work dangerous, Caleb announced he needed to check on a section of fence in the north pasture before the weather worsened. "Storm's supposed to pass by evening," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Should be back well before dark." Elena nodded, already planning the day's indoor tasks. "Be careful. The visibility looks terrible." Caleb smiled at her concern. "Always am." He hesitated, then added, "Thought maybe tomorrow, if the weather clears, we could take that ride up to the falls I've been promising. The snow makes it even more beautiful." Elena's heart skipped. She remembered Victoria's casual mention of picnics at the falls, but pushed the thought aside. "I'd love that. Samuel would enjoy the adventure too." "Good." Caleb's smile was warm as he pulled on his gloves. "See you this evening." But evening came and went without any sign of Caleb. Elena fed Samuel and put him down for the night, then took to pacing by the window, watching the trail for any sign of movement. The snow had stopped, but the world was wrapped in an eerie silence that only deep snow could bring. By 9 o'clock, Elena's concern had deepened to genuine worry. It wasn't like Caleb to be late without sending word. What if he'd been injured? What if his horse had thrown him? The north pasture was remote. If he was hurt, he could be lying out there alone in the bitter cold. The thought of losing Caleb of Samuel, losing the man who had become like a father to him, filled Elena with a terror that surprised her with its intensity. When had her feelings grown so deep? When had this quiet rancher become so essential to her happiness? By 10 o'clock, Elena had made a decision. She couldn't leave Samuel alone to search, but she couldn't simply wait in hope either. Bundling the sleeping baby securely in warm blankets, she carried him to the barn, where she saddled Willow, the gentle mare Caleb had been teaching her to ride. It was a struggle. She'd never saddled a horse alone before, but determination drove her. With Samuel secured against her chest in a thick shawl and a lantern in one hand, Elena set out toward the north pasture following the trail Caleb had described that morning. The night was crystal clear, stars glittering overhead like scattered diamonds. The moon provided enough light to supplement her lantern, and Willow seemed to know the way even when Elena wasn't certain of the trail. She rode cautiously, mindful of both Samuel's safety and her own limited riding skills in winter conditions. "Please be all right," she whispered into the cold air, uncertain whether she was addressing her prayer to God or directly to Caleb. She had ridden perhaps 3 miles when Willow suddenly nickered, ears pricking forward. A moment later, Elena heard an answering call and saw the glow of another lantern approaching through the trees. "Elena!" Caleb's voice carried across the snow, a mixture of surprise and alarm. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here?" Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she nearly wept. He appeared out of the darkness, mounted on his stallion, apparently unharmed, but clearly shocked to find her on the trail. "You didn't come home," she explained, suddenly feeling foolish. "I was worried something had happened." Caleb urged his horse forward until they were side by side, their lanterns casting overlapping circles of warm light on the snow. In the golden glow, she could see a mixture of emotions on his face: concern, bewilderment, and something warmer that made her heart race. "You rode out alone at night in the snow with Samuel because you were worried about me." His voice held a note of wonder. Elena lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, was that wrong?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, not wrong, just unexpected." He reached across to gently touch Samuel's sleeping form. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. Sleeping through his first rescue mission." A smile touched Caleb's lips. "I'm sorry I worried you. Fence was worse than I thought, took longer to repair. Then the snow started coming down harder, and I decided to wait it out in the line shack rather than risk the ride home in a blizzard." "Are you hurt?" Elena asked, scanning him for signs of injury. "Right as rain, just cold and tired." His expression softened as he looked at her. "No one's worried about me in a very long time, Elena." "It's nice, Maze." The simple admission touched her deeply. "Well, get used to it," she said lightly. "As long as Samuel and I are at the ranch, you'll have someone waiting for you to come home." Something shifted in Caleb's gaze at her words. He reached across the space between their horses and took her gloved hand in his. "Elena." But whatever he might have said was interrupted by Samuel stirring in his wrappings, disturbed by their voices in the cold air. Caleb squeezed her hand once, then released it. "Let's get you both home. It's too cold for the little one to be out." They rode side by side through the winter landscape, the only sounds the soft crunch of snow under hooves and the leather creaking of their saddles. Elena was acutely aware of Caleb beside her, solid and reassuring in the starlight. Back at the ranch, Caleb insisted on taking Samuel while Elena dismounted, then carried the still sleeping baby into the cabin while she unsaddled Willow. When she joined them inside, she found Caleb had stoked the fire and was warming his hands by the flames, his expression thoughtful. "Stew's still warm," Elena offered, moving to the stove. "You must be hungry." Caleb turned to face her. "Elena, what you did tonight, riding out alone in those conditions, it was brave." "Foolish, maybe." "Brave," he insisted, "and dangerous. I couldn't stand it if something happened to you because of me." Elena approached him, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "I couldn't just wait here not knowing if you were hurt." "No one's ever done anything like that for me before," he said quietly. The rawness in his admission moved her. "Then they didn't care enough." Caleb's hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I don't think I knew what it meant to have someone care until you and Samuel came into my life." Elena's heart quickened at his touch, at the warmth in his blue eyes. "Caleb." He hesitated for just a moment, then slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. It was Elena who deepened the kiss, her hands moving to frame his fist as she gave in to feelings she'd been fighting for months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "I've wanted to do that for so long," Caleb admitted softly. "But I wasn't sure. I didn't want to presume." Elena silenced him by rising on her toes to kiss him again, putting all her longing and affection into the gesture. When they separated, she remained in his arms, her head resting against his chest. "I love you," she whispered, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart. I tried to tell myself it was too soon, too complicated, but I love you, Caleb Morrison." His arms tightened around Hero. "And I love you, Elena Hartwell, more than I ever thought possible." They held each other by the dying fire, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they just acknowledged. Finally, Caleb drew back enough to look into her eyes. "I know it's complicated," he said. "You're still grieving Thomas, still finding your way. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. Not gratitude, not obligation, but love. True and lasting love." Elena's heart soared, but beneath the joy was a crushing weight of guilt. He loved her, but he loved a lie. He thought Thomas had been a good man who died of fever, leaving behind a grieving widow. He didn't know about the gambling, the drinking, the suicide, or the letter that would have revealed truths too terrible to bear. "Caleb," she began, knowing she had to tell him, had to give him the chance to withdraw his feelings before they went any further. But before she could continue, he was kissing her again, his lips warm and sure against hers, and all rational thought fled. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would find the courage to tell him everything. Tonight she just wanted to hold on to this perfect moment of love and acceptance. When they finally parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I should let you get some sleep," he murmured. "It's been a long night." Elena nodded, though she was reluctant to break the moment. "Tomorrow's ride to the falls is still on." "Absolutely," Caleb confirmed, though perhaps with less drama than tonight's adventure. Elena laughed softly. "One can hope." As she prepared for bed, checking on Samuel, who had slept peacefully through their emotional reunion, Elena felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. Below lay everything she'd ever wanted. Love, security, a real family for Samuel. But behind her lurked the truth about Thomas, a truth that could destroy it all. She had to tell Caleb. She owed him that much. But not tonight. Tonight she would allow herself to fall asleep thinking about the way he'd kissed her, the way he'd said he loved her, the possibility of a future brighter than anything she'd dared imagine. The reckoning could wait until tomorrow. But even as she settled into sleep, Elena's conscience whispered warnings she tried to ignore. Love built on lies was no love at all, and Caleb Morrison deserved the truth, whatever the cost. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect for their promised excursion to the falls. Elena woke to the sound of Caleb moving quietly about the main room, rekindling the fire and starting coffee. Samuel was still sleeping peacefully beside her, his cheeks rosy with warmth. As Elena dressed and prepared Samuel for the day, she found herself studying Caleb when he wasn't looking. The previous night had changed everything between them, creating an intimacy that was both thrilling and terrifying. He moved with a new lightness, humming softly as he prepared their breakfast, and his smiles came easier. "Good morning," she said softly as she joined him in the main room with Samuel in her arms. "Good morning, beautiful," Caleb replied, the endearment coming naturally as he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "How did you sleep?" "Wonderfully." It was true, despite her worries, she'd slept more deeply than she had in months, as if confessing their love had lifted some invisible burden. They prepared for the outing with the easy cooperation of a longtime couple. Caleb packed food and blankets, while Elena bundled Samuel warmly against the cold. The baby was bright-eyed and alert, babbling excitedly, as if he understood they were going on an adventure. The ride to the falls was magical. Fresh snow had transformed the familiar landscape into something from a fairy tale. Pine branches drooped under their white burden, and the creek sang beneath a tracery of ice. Samuel was enchanted, pointing at everything with mittened hands and making delighted sounds. "There it is," Caleb said as they rounded a bend in the trail. Elena's breath caught. The falls were indeed magnificent, even more so than she'd imagined. Water cascaded down a series of rocky ledges, some sections frozen into glittering columns, while others ran free, creating a symphony of ice and flowing water. The pool at the bottom was partially frozen, its surface reflecting the towering pines like a mirror. Caleb had chosen their spot carefully, a level area beside the pool where the morning sun provided both warmth and a spectacular view. He spread blankets on the snow while Elena settled with Samuel, who immediately began trying to eat handfuls of the white powder. "It's breathtaking," Elena said, truly awed by the beauty surrounding them. "I'm glad you think so," Caleb replied, settling beside her on the blanket. "This place has always been special to me, but sharing it with you and Samuel makes it even more meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the play of light on the falling water, listening to Samuel's contented babbling as he explored the new textures and sensations. Elena felt a peace she hadn't known in years, as if all the scattered pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. But beneath the contentment, her conscience continued to whisper. This was the perfect moment to tell Caleb the truth here, in this beautiful private place where they had already shared so much. Yet every time she opened her mouth to begin, the words wouldn't come. "Elena," Caleb said eventually, his voice thoughtful, "can I ask you something?" Her heart skipped. Had he somehow sensed her internal struggle? Of course. "Last night when you said you loved me, did you mean it? Or was it just the emotion of the moment, the relief of finding me safe?" The vulnerability in his question made her chest tight. "I meant it, Caleb, every word." Relief softened his features. "I've been afraid to hope for too much. After Victoria, after the war, I'd convinced myself that some kinds of happiness weren't meant for me." Elena turned to face him fully. "What do you mean?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching Samuel play in the snow. "During the war, I saw things, did things. After Gettysburg, where Thomas saved me, I was in the field hospital for weeks. Fever, infection from my wounds. I had time to think about all the men who didn't make it home, all the families destroyed." His voice grew quiet. "I started to believe that surviving when so many others didn't was a debt I could never repay. That I didn't deserve the things other men take for granted, love, family, happiness." Elena's heart ached for him. "Caleb, that's not true. Thomas used to tell me the same thing," Caleb said with a sad smile. "Even after the war in his letters, he'd write about you, about how happy he was, and he'd always end by telling me I deserved the same." Elena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. "Thomas wrote to you after the war," Caleb nodded. "For about 2 years. Lost touch when I started moving around so much following different ranch work. The last letter I got was maybe 3 years ago." Elena's mouth went dry. "What did he write about?" "Life in Silver Creek, his hopes for the future. He mentioned you were expecting a baby that would have been Samuel. He was so excited to be a father." Caleb's expression was fond with memory. But toward the end, his letters were different, darker. He mentioned having trouble with drinking, with bad dreams. "I worried about him, Sikum." The blood was pounding in Elena's ears. Thomas had been corresponding with Caleb while his gambling and drinking were destroying their marriage. What else had he shared? Had he mentioned the mounting debts, the increasingly desperate schemes to get money? "Elena," Caleb was looking at her with concern. "You've gone pale. Are you all right?" This was it, the moment of truth she'd been both dreading and knowing was inevitable. She could continue the lie, let Caleb believe Thomas had died of fever as a good man who'd simply struggled with demons from the war. Or she could trust in the love they'd declared for each other and tell him everything. "Caleb," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you about Thomas, about how he really died." Caleb's expression grew alert, sensing the gravity in her tone. "What do you mean, how he really died?" Elena took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper worn soft from handling the edges, frayed where she'd read it countless times. "He didn't die of fever," she said, her voice breaking. "Thomas. Thomas killed himself." The words hung in the cold air between them like a physical blow. Caleb's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then a terrible understanding. "Elena, there's more," she continued, knowing she had to tell him everything now or lose her courage forever. "I found this letter. He wrote it before he—" She couldn't say the words again. With hands that shook, she unfolded the paper and held it out to Caleb. He took it carefully as if it might burn him and began to read. Elena watched his face as he absorbed Thomas's final desperate words. "My dearest Elena, by the time you read this, I will be beyond the reach of my failures and the demons that have made our life a misery. The debts are worse than you know, much worse. Turner will come for everything, including you and the baby, if I cannot pay. I have tried every scheme, every desperate gamble, and only made things worse. The laudanum helps with the dreams, but not with the shame of what I've become. I am not the man you married, not the father Samuel deserves. You are both better off without me. Tell our son his father was a coward who loved him but couldn't find the strength to be worthy of him. Tell him you deserved a better husband than the broken creature I became. I have failed you both, but perhaps my death will free you from the worst of my debts. There is a policy small, but it might help you start over. Forgive me if you can. Forget me if you cannot. Thomas Caleb read the letter twice, his face growing more grave with each word. When he finally looked up, Elena was crying silently, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. Elena, he said softly, I'm so sorry. The compassion in his voice broke something inside her. You should hate me, she sobbed. I lied to you. I've been lying to everyone. I let them put us up for auction rather than tell the truth about what Thomas did. Caleb carefully folded the letter and handed it back to her. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was ashamed, Elena whispered. Because I thought if you knew the truth about the suicide, about the debts, about what kind of man I'd married, you'd see me differently. You'd see Samuel differently. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd told him. Samuel, oblivious to the emotional storm around him, continued playing in the snow, occasionally looking up at them with bright, trusting eyes. The letter mentioned laudanum, Caleb said finally. For the dreams. Elena nodded. The nightmares from the war. They got worse after Samuel was born. Thomas would wake up screaming, sometimes not knowing where he was. He started taking laudanum to sleep, then drinking during the day to function. Everything spiraled from there. And you lived with this, alone, tried to hold everything together while he was falling apart. I thought I could save him, Elena said brokenly. I thought love would be enough, but it wasn't. Nothing was enough. Caleb reached over and gently took her hand. The touch was so unexpected, so kind, that Elena looked up in surprise. Elena, listen to me, he said firmly. Thomas's choices, the gambling, the drinking, the way he died, none of that was your fault. You were 23 years old trying to save a man who was drowning in demons you couldn't even see clearly. But I lied to you. You protected yourself and your son the only way you knew how, Caleb interrupted, in a world that would have judged you harshly for something that wasn't your doing. Elena stared at him through her tears. You're not angry. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. I'm angry that you felt you had to carry this burden alone. I'm angry that Thomas couldn't find another way, couldn't get the help he needed. But angry at you, no. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that she felt lightheaded. I was so afraid you'd see me as damaged goods, that you'd think Samuel and I came with too much baggage. Elena, Caleb said, moving closer and cupping her face in his hands. Look at me. She met his eyes, seeing in them the same warmth and love that had been there the night before. I love you, he said simply. Not some perfect version of you, but you. The woman who fought to save her husband, even when he was beyond saving. The woman who protected her son, even when it meant enduring public humiliation. The woman who rode out in a snowstorm because she was worried about me. He wiped away her tears with his thumbs. Your past doesn't scare me, Elena. If anything, it makes me love you more, because I see how strong you really are. Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by his acceptance. I don't deserve you. Neither of us deserves the other, Caleb replied. But we have each other anyway. That's what love is, a gift we don't earn, but choose to treasure. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried out months of fear and shame and guilt. Samuel crawled over to them, sensing his mother's distress, and patting her leg with his small hand. When Elena's tears finally subsided, she pulled back to look at Caleb. There's one more thing, she said quietly. Something Thomas mentioned in letters to friends, though he never told me directly. Caleb waited patiently. Samuel? Elena said, her voice barely audible. He might not be Thomas's son. Caleb's expression didn't change, but she felt him go very still. Before I married Thomas, I was attacked by a man who worked for my father. I never told anyone, not even Thomas. When I missed my monthly bleeding and realized I was with child, I let Thomas believe Samuel was conceived on our wedding night. Elena's voice was barely a whisper now. I don't know whose son he is, Caleb. And neither did Thomas, though I think toward the end he suspected. It was one more thing eating away at him. Caleb looked down at Samuel, who was now pulling himself up on Caleb's knee, his round face bright with innocent joy. The baby had Caleb's full attention for a long moment, and Elena held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, Caleb lifted Samuel onto his lap, supporting the baby's back with one arm on, while his other hand remained on Elena's shoulder. It doesn't matter, he said simply. Elena blinked in surprise. What? It doesn't matter whose blood runs in his veins, Caleb said, his voice firm with conviction. Samuel is your son. You've raised him, loved him, protected him. That makes him yours in every way that counts. He looked at Elena directly. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be his father. Not because of blood or obligation, but because I love him. Because I love both of you. The simple declaration broke Elena's heart open in the best possible way. Caleb, awed Elena Hartwell, he said, shifting Samuel to one arm so he could take her hand with the other. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a husband to you and a father to Samuel? Will you help me turn that lonely ranch into a real home? Elena looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but love and acceptance and a future she'd never dared dream possible. Around them, the falls continued their eternal song, and Samuel babbled happily in Caleb's arms, reaching for snowflakes with pure delight. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Caleb Morrison, I will marry you. He kissed her then deeply and tenderly, sealing their promise while Samuel gurgled with pleasure between them. When they broke apart, both were crying, but with warmth rather than sorrow. When Elena asked, hardly daring to believe this was real. Spring, Caleb said, when the snow melts and the wildflowers bloom. We'll have the ceremony here at the falls if you'd like. Seems fitting since this is where we told each other the truth. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the happiness filling her throat. For the first time since that terrible morning, when she'd found Thomas's body, she felt truly free. Free from the weight of secrets, free from the shame of circumstances beyond her control, free to love and be loved in return. As they packed up their picnic and prepared to return to the ranch, Elena realized that she'd been wrong about love built on lies. Real love could only exist in the presence of truth, and she and Caleb had finally found that truth together. Samuel fell asleep against Caleb's chest during the ride home, perfectly content in the arms of the man who would become his father. Elena rode beside them, her heart full of gratitude for the mysterious ways that led hearts to where they needed to be. Behind them, the falls continued their ancient song witness to the healing power of truth and the miracle of love that accepts without condition. Ahead lay a future bright with possibility, a future they would build together one honest day at a time. As they crested the final hill before home, Elena saw the cabin waiting for them in the afternoon sunlight, smoke curling from the chimney in welcome. It looked different now, not just a refuge, but truly home. Their home. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena Hartwell believed in happy endings. Thank you so much for joining us for this emotional journey of redemption and second chances. Elena and Caleb's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest love comes when we're brave enough to be completely honest with each other. Flaws and all, if this story touched your heart, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more uplifting tales that celebrate the power of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. What did you think of Elena's choice to reveal her secret? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of hope and healing. Until next time, remember that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness.